Hey, good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Capitalist Recap. First off, I just wanted to thank everybody who tuned in and shared our interview that we did last Wednesday with Curtis Houck from Newsbusters. If you haven't checked out that interview, we still have it up on our Facebook page. We had a great conversation about how people can intelligently consume media, how to look for bias in articles and everything that you're reading. It was a really enlightening conversation, and I would definitely encourage you to take a look at it. I've mentioned before our scorecard. So what I'd like to do is just kind of pull that up today so that we can show you how to navigate that system and see how your member of the General Assembly is doing. So we'll start out just really kind of on the main screen, which is pretty basic. You'll see the website address, kind of crawling across the bottom of the screen here. And there's several different ways to kind of go through and do this. One of them is the Find My Legislators function, where you can put in what your location is. You can actually search just by zip code. I'm going to put in the zip code where the CAP office is. Help if I use the right numbers. Oh, you know what? It's not letting me do the zip code. So my apologies. You're actually going to have to type in the address. As much information as you have. So this is the House and Senate for the zip code where the CAP offices are. So you'll see that you can actually pull up the House. It's Representative Cheryl Delosier, who has a C-. And in the Senate, we have Senator Mike Regan, who is a Republican, who has an F-. You may be shocked to learn that as far as the General Assembly is concerned, we really don't have a lot of members in the Republican Party who actually score well on our scorecard. And for an organization like ours that's really focused on economics and free markets and people being able to keep more of their money and making sure that government is being responsible, one would hope that the Republican Party, who touts itself as being fiscally responsible, would actually be fiscally responsible. That's not the case. And for anybody who's followed politics for any extended period of time, you'll know that the Republican Party just generally doesn't do a good job of following through with that. So if you wanted to just pull up and see how members of the House and Senate were doing, the default for us is actually, it's alphabetical order. So if you don't know what House district you're in, you can just pull up the list in alphabetical order and follow that down. One of the interesting ways of doing it too, and this kind of gives you a good broad look at how things are, is you can actually sort it by score. So you have the best people, you can bring up the best people first, everybody with A's, and then that goes down until we get into the lower grades. I think one of the things, just to kind of give you an idea, when I say that the Republican Party generally doesn't follow through with what they're supposed to be doing, one of the ways that I will illustrate that is by showing you members of leadership for the Republican Party, in particular in the House and the Senate. Kerry Benioff is this gentleman right here, is the incoming majority leader. And you can see that he scores an F on our scorecard. So if you were to click on Mr. Benioff or your own individual lawmaker's score, we have a bunch of helpful information. You can see that in 2019, he got an F. He also has an F this year, but we also are able to, thanks to Transparency USA, we're actually able to show you who his top contributors are to his campaign finance, and also where he's spending his money. So what you see is a lot of money is coming in from various political action committees, various lobbying organizations, and what he's doing is he's actually giving it to the House Republican Campaign Committee. and they're using that money to assist other lawmakers. But when we take a look at, what and where Mr. Benninghoff is running afoul, one of the things that we did was we actually have the legislation in here. We have, this is something that we were opposed to, and this is how they voted. And you'll see this, basically be the same throughout. And if you want to find out more about a particular piece of legislation, all you need to do is click on it. And by clicking on it, it pulls up a description. So this particular piece of legislation is really related to what the General Assembly decided to do was to give the authority to raise fees on the Fish and Boat Commission rather than them having to approve what the fee increase is going to be. They give the authority to the Fish and Boat Commission. The Fish and Boat Commission passes their fee increase, and then if the legislature decides that it's too high, they can come in and override them, which is really kind of a backwards way to do it. One of the things that we found, and one of the reasons that we have so many problems in government today, is that the General Assembly has really given away its authority to either the executive branch or various bureaucrats in order really to wash their hands of things. So they're not actually responsible for a lot of the problems. They can just point their fingers at somebody else. And when you look at the original intent of what the founding fathers wanted, it was to make sure that the folks who were representing us most closely, that is members of the House and Senate, are the ones who have really the most responsibility. And over time, we've seen that their willingness to accept that responsibility erode. And this is just an example of that. So there's a variety of other legislation that we went through. We don't score every bill. They vote on too many things. So what we do is throughout the year, usually in June after the budget is done, we'll upload the votes for the first half of the year. And then from June through the end of November, we'll update things as they're being voted on. So we try and update it in the second half of the year more as a real time, so you can get an idea what's happening as it's happening. So going back to, Mr. Benninghoff, or Representative Benninghoff, as I had mentioned, is the majority leader. He'll be the one who is responsible for largely scheduling votes and making decisions on the legislative floor. The Speaker of the House is thankfully towards the top of the alphabet as well, and that's Representative Brian Cutler. Representative Cutler, as you'll see, also has an F. And I would wager that it's for much the same reason. If you wanted to go through and take a look at where we disagreed or where he took votes that were kind of antithetical to what we're looking for, you would be able to do that. And it would be the same process that you would use in order to find your own member of the General Assembly. So that kind of gives you an overview of how the House works. You can also, if you are so inclined, sort these out by district number. So if you know the district number that you live in, you can sort it by that versus alphabetically. You can sort it by party, so you can see, okay, here's how all the members of the Democratic Party are doing. And I can kind of, spoiler alert, tell you that pretty much all of them failed. I think we might have 1 or 2 Ds on our scorecard, but for the most part, they're all not doing particularly well. Or again, as I said, you can sort them by score. The other thing that you can do is, if you're not interested really in who we scored, but what we scored, you can come over to the Votes Scored tab, and that'll show you all of the legislation that we did. And then from there, if you wanted to see, okay, so here's a veto override, you want to see who actually did that, you can go through and just see how all of the members voted on that particular piece of legislation, which is pretty handy, if you're trying to figure out, okay, as I had mentioned, they used a very a fairly large amount of money, over $1 billion, that was meant for business owners to plug a budget hole, which I believe is Senate Bill 1350. It's one of the last couple that they voted on. Oh, that is the budget. So let's see here. There we go. That's the fiscal code. So you can actually come in here and see, all right, so let's see who did a good thing and voted against it. We have not all that, it goes, so it'll actually be alphabetical, so you can take a look. There were a number of Republicans you can see here that voted against it. Most of the no votes on this were Democrats. Unfortunately, we can't separate people based on the reason why they voted against something. So generally speaking, what we've found is that Democrats vote against the budget or against the fiscal code because they either wanted to spend more or they wanted to do something different financially. But as long as they could be voting the right way for the wrong reason. And that's one of the things that you're just not able to capture in a scorecard. But in here, we can actually see there were quite a few Republicans, obviously not enough, voting against it because there were only 92 no votes to stop essentially using the CARES Act federal funding to bail out the Department of Corrections. However, it's also kind of worth noting that the General Assembly, they used that money, well, I would definitely argue in an inappropriate way. What they didn't do was they didn't go after any of the other corporate welfare in the budget that they could have used to plug that hole. One of the best examples of that is Pennsylvania has a $250 million a year racehorse development fund, and that goes to subsidize the racehorsing industry. Every year, $250 million is put into that funding, and that would be an opportunity for the General Assembly to use those funds to plug holes, or I know this is a crazy idea, maybe actually cut some spending that isn't useful. So that gives you an idea just kind of how the House stacks up. Going into the Senate, I'll show you how the leadership there voted. For the most part, actually in the Senate, which is really sad, when we sort it by score, we have 4 people who have a passing grade on our scorecard. Everybody else fails. And we don't, we don't pull punches when it comes to the scorecard. We don't have, weights. We're calling balls and strikes on this stuff. Some of these are really kind of no-brainers when it comes to voting. At least you would think they would be no-brainers. However, they just don't turn out to be. But getting away from that and showing you by legislator. So let's look at this one again in an alphabetical order, so I can show you the leadership in the Senate. Jake Corman is going to be coming in as the president pro tempore of the Senate. So he has an F-, and then we also have Kim Ward, who will be coming in as the majority leader. And Senator Ward also has an F. Senator Ward has an F-. So again, both Republicans, if you want to take a look at how they ended up. Oh, and Senator Joe Scarnati is the outgoing president pro tempore, and he also has an F. So when you take a look at what's happening in the General Assembly, everybody really wants to just cast all the blame at Governor Wolf. And look, don't get me wrong, Governor Wolf has done a lot wrong, particularly as it relates to the handling of COVID-19. However, when you take a look at the history of Pennsylvania politics, Pennsylvania has a history of a bipartisan effort to adopt bad policies. In 2001, Republican Governor Tom Ridge increased public sector, so state employees and employees of the school districts, their pensions by 25%. Shortly after that, the stock market bottomed out, and they never changed anything related to that. What they did was, because the contributions that were required to meet that new higher pension amount were too high, they actually said, well, we're not going to pay those high amounts. We're going to decrease, we're going to put a collar on the amount of money that we're going to pay into the pension system. And that's one of the reasons that today we have a $75 billion pension deficit. One of the other more recent Republicans that folks point to as, well, if we only had a Republican governor, things would get done. People don't actually consider the fact that Tom Corbett had a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, and one of the biggest things he did was increase gas taxes. He increased gas taxes for vehicles so much that they couldn't do it all at once, and that's one of the reasons that the gas tax has been going up year after year, because they've actually been putting that through on an annual basis. So the Republicans and Democrats in Pennsylvania have a long history of doing things that are bad for taxpayers, and simply blaming one party or the other really lets people off the hook. Hopefully you found the walkthrough on our scorecard helpful. I hope that you'll take some time, find your member of the General Assembly in the House and the Senate, take a look at their scores, take a look at what legislation we scored, and really start to ask some questions of how folks who are supposed to be representing you in Harrisburg, what they're actually doing. I appreciate that you took the time to tune in this morning. So again, thank you very much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week.